May God bless your day and bring you peace as we embark on today's journey. I mean, imagine having this detailed, foolproof blueprint to build a house, right? But every time you follow the instructions, the walls just collapse.
Oh, yeah, like the physics are broken.
Exactly. You pour the foundation, you frame the timber, but the physical laws of gravity seem completely reversed. And that is exactly what happens when we try to apply our normal, everyday human logic to the mechanics of spiritual virtues.
It really is.
We expect a clean, measurable checklist for self-improvement, but instead, we step into a landscape that is completely counterintuitive. It's a place where the things you think will build you up actually tear you down, and the moments that feel like total surrender are what actually make you whole.
Right. It is the absolute definition of an inverted reality. I mean, the deeper you go into internal morality, the more you realize that our baseline human instincts, they're often pointing in the exact opposite direction of true spiritual health.
Yeah, and exploring that inverted reality is our mission for this deep dive. We are pulling from some incredibly profound source material today, specifically Book 3, Chapters 7 through 12, written by the renowned author C.S. Lewis.
Such a dense, amazing section.
It really is. We're going to examine his insights on forgiveness, pride, charity, hope, and faith. And the goal for you listening is to understand not just what these virtues are, but the underlying psychology of why they challenge our basic nature so fiercely.
Because they really do fight our nature.
They totally do. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with how we treat the people around us. Because the material kicks off with a concept that is, well, universally praised in poetry, but almost universally despised in practice, which is forgiveness.
Yeah, and Lewis is entirely uncompromising on this front. He notes that the mandate to love your neighbor explicitly includes loving your enemies.
Which is rough.
Right. I mean, people are drawn to the beautiful concept of forgiveness when it's abstract.
Yeah.
It feels noble, But the moment you attach a specific face to the offense, like someone who's genuinely betrayed you, or on a macro level, historical atrocities, the human stomach physically turns at the idea of forgiving them.
Oh, absolutely.
And he was writing this during World War II, so he uses the Gestapo as the ultimate stress test for this virtue.
Right, and as a quick note for you listening, we are looking objectively at the author's logic today. We aren't endorsing a specific stance on politically charged topics like the death penalty or pacifism. We're just reporting how the author dissects the human soul in these extreme scenarios.
Exactly.
Because he makes this massive distinction between internal forgiveness and external justice. He actually argues that a Christian who commits a murder should still turn themselves in to face the ultimate penalty, which was capital punishment in the UK at the time.
Right.
The argument being that you can fully forgive someone, or even yourself, while still demanding that justice be served.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism he's describing. It's the age-old, often confusing directive to hate the sin, but not the sinner.
Which sounds like a cliche, honestly.
It does. On the surface, separating a person from the terrible things they do feels like an impossible mental gymnastic routine. I mean, how do you look at a cruel act and not hate the person orchestrating it?
Yeah, how?
Well, the brilliance of the argument is how it points a mirror directly back at us. It asks you to consider someone whose actions you frequently despise. Someone who acts cowardly, greedy, or selfish, but whom you fundamentally still love and care for.
Well, that person is me.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm the person I forgive the most.
That is the precise mechanism. We look back at our own past mistakes, our moments of cowardice or petty cruelty, and we feel genuine disgust. We hate those actions.
So deeply.
But that hatred of the action doesn't extinguish our fundamental love for ourselves. In fact, we hate the bad actions because we love ourselves and desperately wish we were better.
Wow. Yeah, we want to be cured.
Right. We want ourselves to be cured. And we are being asked to take that exact same internal machinery, that ability to separate the core self from the diseased action, and apply it to our enemies. To hate their cruelty, but still maintain a baseline hope that they can somehow be cured and made human again.
But I mean, practically speaking, trying to apply my own self-love to an enemy feels completely paralyzing. If I'm supposed to start doing that today, I'm going to fail.
Oh, everyone would.
So how do we actually build the capacity for that kind of radical forgiveness without just, giving up in frustration?
Well, Lewis uses a brilliant analogy about learning mathematics. You don't walk into a classroom on day one and attempt to solve complex calculus.
No, you'd be crushed.
Exactly. You start with basic addition and subtraction. In the same way, if you want to learn the mechanics of forgiveness, you do not start by trying to forgive the most horrific dictators in history.
Right.
You start by forgiving your spouse for an offhand comment they made yesterday. You practice on your coworker who took credit for your idea. You train the muscle on the minor infractions so that it functions when the major ones hit.
Which brings up a real struggle I have with the next virtue, which is charity. Today, we usually define charity as a financial donation or just a warm, fuzzy feeling of universal affection.
Right, like giving to a GoFundMe.
Exactly. But the author defines charity purely as a state of the will, not an emotion. My issue is, if I don't feel love for someone, but I force myself to act as if I do, aren't I just being a massive hypocrite? I mean, it feels completely fake.
That's a super common pushback. But there is a deep psychological difference between hypocrisy and training the will. Hypocrisy is acting kindly to hide a malicious intent, like a con artist.
Okay, sure.
Training the will is acting kindly because you're trying to actualize an ideal that your emotions haven't caught up to yet. Think of the will as a thermostat and your emotions as a thermometer.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, a thermometer just passively reflects the environment. It goes up and down based on whatever's happening around it. Your emotions are exactly the same way. You cannot directly control whether you feel affection for a frustrating coworker.
Right, they just annoy you.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But the thermostat sets the intention for the room. The will decides how you're going to behave, regardless of the temperature.
That makes a lot of sense. So if I am sitting in traffic and someone cuts me off, my thermometer spikes to anger. I can't help that flash of emotion.
Nope.
But my thermostat, my will, can decide not to lean on the horn or scream out the window.
Precisely. And when you consistently operate from the thermostat, a strange law of human psychology kicks in. The emotions eventually follow the actions.
Really?
Yeah. If you purposefully do something kind for someone you deeply dislike, you will find your hostility toward them slightly diminished. And the terrifying inverse is also true.
Oh, boy.
If you act cruelly toward someone, you will begin to hate them more. It's just a matter of cognitive dissonance. When you harm someone, your brain has to justify your cruel action by convincing you that the victim deserved it.
Wow. So it spirals.
It really does. Good deeds multiply into a greater capacity for affection, and cruel deeds multiply into deeper darkness. It is literally a geometric progression of the soul.
Okay, so if we successfully manage to operate on this level, treating people well despite our fluctuating feelings, we inevitably hit a massive internal wall.
We do.
There is a core disease that actively resists this self-forgetful love, and the source material points to the great sin, the ultimate anti-God state of mind, which is pride. Compared to pride, things like anger, greed, or unchastity are described as mere flea bites.
Yeah, flea bites. Pride is uniquely toxic because its core characteristic is competition.
Right.
People do not feel proud simply because they are wealthy, intelligent, or attractive. They feel proud because they are wealthier, more intelligent, or more attractive than the person sitting next to them.
It's all relative.
Exactly. If everyone in the world suddenly became equally rich or smart, the proud person would lose all their joy. The pleasure of pride only exists in the act of looking down on someone else. It's the friction of superiority.
That completely changes the framing of everyday morality. I mean,
Yeah.
if pride thrives on competition, it means you can be a highly disciplined, outwardly moral person and still be completely consumed by the great sin.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why the author issues such a stark warning here. He argues that the devil will gladly help you cure your minor character flaws, like a bad temper or laziness, by feeding your pride to keep you in line.
Wait, really?
Yes, he will allow you to become incredibly brave, disciplined, and chaste, so long as those virtues cause you to look down your nose at everyone who lacks them.
That is terrifying.
It's the equivalent of curing a minor skin rash by intentionally giving the patient a malignant tumor. The outward behavior improves, but the internal soul is rotting.
I have to push back on the everyday application of this, though, because taking away pride feels unnatural in certain contexts.
How so?
Well, what if I am just incredibly proud of my child's accomplishments, or proud of a massive project I finally finished at work? Is the goal to just feel a sense of apathy about our own lives?
No, not at all. The distinction lies in admiration versus comparison. When we say we are proud of a child or a piece of work, we usually mean we hold a deep, warm admiration for it.
Okay, right.
That is entirely healthy. The spiritual cancer only begins when that admiration mutates into a tool for superiority. The danger is when the thought shifts from, my child is wonderful, to, my child is wonderful, which proves I am a superior parent to you.
Ah, okay, I see. So the antidote to this competitive sickness is true humility. But the popular image of humility is terrible. We picture someone who is constantly groveling, calling themselves an idiot, and suffering from miserable self-esteem.
Right, and that is a counterfeit humility. A truly humble person won't be a self-deprecating mess. They will likely just strike you as an incredibly cheerful, intelligent person who takes a genuine interest in what you have to say.
Because they aren't obsessed with themselves.
Exactly, because true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. It is the absolute relief of self-forgetfulness. You no longer have to constantly monitor your ego or defend your dignity.
That sounds exhausting anyway.
It is. The proud person is locked in a state of constantly looking down to ensure they are above others. And logically, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see anything that is above you.
Right. And when you start dismantling that competitive ego, your perspective naturally shifts. You stop looking sideways, you stop looking down, and you finally have the bandwidth to look up.
Exactly.
And when you do, you might realize something deeply uncomfortable. Even your absolute best, most perfect earthly experiences leave you feeling slightly empty. That natural sense of disappointment perfectly transitions us into the virtue of hope.
Hope is frequently dismissed by modern critics as mere escapism.
Yeah.
It is mocked as a coping mechanism for people who can't handle reality, like a promise of a pie in the sky when you die.
Right, like it's a crutch.
Exactly. But Lewis points to the historical record to refute this. The Christians who made the most profound impacts on this world, the ones who drove the abolition of slavery, who built the foundational hospitals and universities of the Middle Ages, were precisely the ones whose minds were most intensely occupied with the next world.
Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in.
Exactly the concept. When you make the perfection of this world your ultimate goal, you inevitably ruin it. Because Earth was never designed to bear the weight of ultimate fulfillment.
Yeah.
Think about human experience. You plan the perfect vacation. You finally land the dream job. You marry the person you love. There is a profound thrill, but eventually the novelty fades.
Always does.
A subtle ache returns. Nothing on earth entirely delivers on the magnificent promise it seems to whisper to us. And the author outlines 3 distinct archetypes for how human beings deal with this unquenchable desire.
Let's break those down. First is the fool's way. This is the person who blames the specific objects of their desire. They constantly think, if I just had a different partner, a more expensive car, or a bigger house, then I'd finally patch that elusive happiness.
The treadmill.
Exactly. They spend their entire lives on a treadmill, discarding people and things, endlessly chasing mirages.
Yeah.
Second, you have the disillusioned sensible man. And this is a very common modern archetype. This person decides the whole concept of ultimate joy is a trick. They repress that deep ache, settle down into a comfortable cynicism, and mock anyone who still dreams. They protect themselves from disappointment by basically deadening their own soul.
And then there is the Christian way. This approach accepts that these earthly thrills were never actually meant to satisfy us completely. The beauty of a landscape or the joy of a relationship are just echoes.
Right.
They are meant to arouse our desire and point our compass toward the real thing which exists outside of this universe.
Here's where it gets really interesting because he uses a biological argument that just cuts right through the philosophy.
Well, I love this part.
It's so good. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food to satisfy it. A duck wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Humans have sexual desires. Well, sex exists. Therefore, if I find within myself a deep, persistent desire that absolutely nothing in this entire world can satisfy, the most probable logical explanation is that I was made for another world.
It's a staggering logical deduction,
Huh?
and it completely reorients how we are supposed to interpret the imagery of heaven in the source material.
How so?
Well, critics often mock the biblical descriptions, the golden streets, the harps, the crowns, as childish fairy tales. But taking those literalistically is missing the underlying mechanics of the text. Those physical items are placeholders for psychological and spiritual realities.
Okay.
Harps represent a state of pure, unending ecstasy. Gold represents timelessness, a realm where beauty doesn't decay. Crowns represent humanity sharing in a divine authority. To think the author literally meant we will sit on clouds plucking instruments is like thinking you were supposed to physically lay an egg when you were told to be like a dove.
That is such a great way to put it. So if looking up gives us hope, this realization that we are fundamentally built for a different environment, then how do we actually bridge the gap between here and there?
That's the big question.
And that brings us to faith, which serves as the practical engine for this entire journey. The source material breaks faith down into 2 distinct levels. Now, level 1 faith used to deeply confuse me. I couldn't understand why simply believing a set of facts was considered a moral virtue.
Right, you either believe the evidence or you don't.
Yeah, you review the evidence and believe it or you don't. Where is the morality in that?
Well, that confusion stems from a very modern, flawed assumption about how the human brain works. We assume that the intellect is completely sovereign. We think that once the prefrontal cortex logically accepts something as true, that belief just locks into place forever.
But it totally doesn't.
Not at all. Human psychology is far more volatile. Our nervous system, our fears, and our imaginations are constantly overriding our logic.
Think about a boy taking swimming lessons. His intellect knows perfectly well that the human body has buoyancy. He has watched other people float. He has seen the evidence. But the moment the instructor lets go of him in the deep end, his amygdala fires up.
Pure panic.
Exactly. Panic sets in. His emotions completely scream over his logic, and he thrashes around, literally losing his faith and buoyancy. Or consider going in for a medical procedure. You have reviewed the surgeon's credentials. You know the anesthesiologist is highly trained.
But you're terrified.
Right. When you are strapped to the table and that mask goes over your face, a primal, irrational terror takes over. Your emotions rebel against the evidence.
And that dynamic is exactly why level 1 faith is necessary. It is not the absence of reason, it is the active defense of reason. Faith is the acquired habit of holding on to the things your intellect has already accepted, despite the onslaught of your changing moods.
Because the moods will always change.
Because your moods will inevitably shift. You will face grief, you will be surrounded by cynics, or you will be deeply tempted to act selfishly. In those vulnerable moments, it isn't new logical evidence that attacks your belief system. It is just a fluctuating mood. Faith is the mental discipline of anchoring your mind against the storm of your own biology.
Wow. But then we cross into level 2 faith. This is the phase of bankruptcy, and you only reach this level when you try, with everything you have, to be perfectly good. We tend to think that virtuous people don't really understand temptation.
Oh, that's a huge myth.
We assume they are just naturally wired to be good, so it's easy for them.
The text completely shatters that misconception. It argues that a person who gives into a temptation after 5 minutes has absolutely no idea what that temptation feels like after an hour of grueling resistance.
That makes so much sense.
You only discover the true, terrifying strength of an enemy army by fighting it to the bitter end, not by throwing down your weapons and surrendering immediately. You only know the sheer force of the wind by trying to walk directly against it. Bad people know very little about badness because they have lived entirely in the shelter of their own surrender.
And when you finally try to walk against that wind, when you truly try to implement the thermostat of charity or strip away the competition of pride, you inevitably fail.
You fall flat on your face.
Yeah, you discover that your own internal willpower is just insufficient. You realize you are morally bankrupt. And that realization is vital because it destroys the commercial transaction we all try to set up with God. We treat morality like a university exam. We think, if I get a passing grade, if I do enough good deeds, God owes me a reward.
This raises an important question for you listening to deeply consider. Are you treating your spirituality like a contract negotiation? The profound reality is that every faculty you possess, your intellect, your physical energy, the very neurons firing in your brain to make a moral choice, is already a gift. You cannot put the Creator in your debt because you literally have nothing to offer that wasn't handed to you first.
The analogy he uses to explain this is just beautiful. Imagine a small child going up to their father and asking for $10 to buy the father a birthday present.
I love this one.
The father gladly hands over the money, and when the child presents the gift later, the father is genuinely thrilled. It's a wonderful, loving exchange. But only a complete fool would look at that scenario and conclude that the father actually gained anything financially.
Right.
That is the exact mechanism of our good deeds. We are simply using the allowance we are graciously given.
Which perfectly resolves one of the most exhausting, centuries-old theological debates, the argument over whether a person is saved by faith or saved by works. Are we rescued by mentally surrendering or by our moral actions? Lewis cuts through the noise with a brilliantly simple metaphor. He compares faith and works to the two blades of a pair of scissors.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It is.
Because asking which one is more necessary is like asking which blade of the scissors actually does the cutting. It's a nonsensical question. You need the intense moral effort, the works, to push you against the wind until you realize you are bankrupt and need rescue.
Right.
But that rescue, that ultimate surrender of faith, is what transforms your internal state. And a transformed internal state naturally produces more good works, not out of a frantic, anxious need to earn a paycheck, but out of a genuine desire to participate in the life you've been given. The two blades are inseparable.
And when you cross the threshold into that level 2 faith, the anxiety of the checklist finally drops away. You stop desperately trying to build your own perfect little moral house, and you begin to trust the process of being rebuilt into a completely different kind of structure by a master architect. The pressure is off your own fragile willpower, and the authentic journey begins.
So what does this all mean? We have navigated some incredibly deep waters today. We've seen that these core virtues, forgiveness, charity, humility, hope, and faith, are not arbitrary rules designed to make life boring.
Far from it.
They are the psychological and spiritual mechanisms required to dismantle the competitive, anxious self. They move us from being passive thermometers to active thermostats. They teach us to anchor our reason against the tidal wave of our moods and ultimately to drop the exhausting illusion that we can fund our own salvation.
It is a total paradigm shift. It is the realization that true freedom is found not in elevating the ego, but in the profound relief of leaving it behind.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over in the days ahead. Think back to our breakdown of pride and that counterfeit version of humility. If true humility is nothing more than cheerful self-forgetfulness, what parts of yourself, your reputation, or your dignity are you fiercely defending right now that are actually just making you miserable? What heavy armor are you wearing today that you could simply choose to take off?
That is exactly the kind of question that moves this material from theory into practice.
It changes everything when you apply it. Now, for everyone listening, I want to let you know that we are not done with this extraordinary source material. We will have a new deep dive of this exact same book next time as we continue to explore the mechanics of the human soul through C.S. Lewis's insights. You definitely won't want to miss where this goes next. God blesses all the listeners.